Hello, my name is Stroud. I'm the Director of Global Conservation Programs at Born for USA. I'm joining you today from Uzbekistan, where I'm attending the 20th meeting of the CITES Conference of the Parties. 185 countries and hundreds of representatives from non-governmental organizations like Born for USA are gathered to discuss how to better protect species affected by international trade. And you submitted some questions about CITES. I'm excited about this opportunity to answer them. So let's dive in. When was CITES begun and why? This year is actually a very symbolic year for CITES. The convention is turning 50. It entered into force in 1975, 50 years ago. It was signed in 1973. And it all started because countries realized they were powerless to tackle international trade and the threat it represents to species. At the national level alone, they had to collaborate with one another to ensure that international trade wasn't detrimental to their national conservation efforts and didn't affect the recovery of threatened species. Second question, on average, how many new species receive CITES protection that were not previously listed during a CITES conference? The answer to that question from Born Free's perspective is that not enough species receive CITES protection. We should see way more species proposed for listing at CITES conferences. Our perspective is that no threatened or endangered species should be in commercial trade. You have hundreds of species that are not listed in CITES list appendices, and this meets the criteria for listing. So we really need to ensure that CITES meets the moment and increases the number of species that are listed and protected to ensure no species is negatively impacted by commercial international trade. Next question. What are the CITES protection tiers, appendices, and what do they mean? So CITES has a regime that recognizes 3 levels of protection. Appendix 1 protection is the maximum level of protection is for the most threatened species, the species that are the most threatened by international trade. And in Appendix 1, when a species is in Appendix 1, it cannot be in commercial trade. Commercial international trade is prohibited for this species. Appendix 2 is the appendix under which threatened species can be in commercial trade, but that trade is regulated. That means that you have to prove that trade is not detrimental in order for it to move forward. And Appendix 3 is the annex in which the species are listed when a country needs support from other countries to regulate international trade in that particular species. It requires collaboration of the other countries to monitor the impact that trade is having on that particular species, and that is Appendix 3. So next question. Is it a good or a bad thing for a species to be protected under CITES? Well, it is both a good and a bad thing. What's really bad is that if you are listed in the CITES appendices, that means that as a species, you meet the biological criteria for listing. It means that your survival is already jeopardized. You're threatened, you're critically endangered, you're endangered, and you're affected by international trade. So it's very negative in that sense. What's very positive is that parties have decided to do something about it. They've decided to ensure that trade, international trade, would no longer be detrimental by regulating international trade through CITES protection. So it's both a good and a bad thing. Next question. What is Born for USA's role at CITES? Born for USA has 3 very important roles at CITES. First, we advocate to ensure more species are listed and that all species that meet the listing criteria receive adequate protection. We consider that no threatened species should be in commercial trade. We advocate for all CITES negatively impacted by international trade are adequately listed so that CITES plays its role in protecting them. Second, we want to make sure that CITES plays its role in tackling wildlife crime. Wildlife crime is a threat that is really significant, destroying biodiversity, significantly affecting livelihoods. We want to make sure that wildlife crime is tackled appropriately. And third, we advocate for more funding. We need CITES to be adequately funded in order for it to be enforced properly. That's very significant, especially in the countries we work in. So we're advocating for new funding mechanisms, bold funding mechanisms to ensure that CITES is effective and meets the moment. Next question. What was the first species to receive CITES protection? Well, the first Conference of the Parties was held in 1976, which is when I was born, so that's quite a long time ago. But the first series of species that were listed were some primate species like lemurs, the polar bear, and then I believe a cackling goose. But what's very important to note is that CITES has evolved over time, of course, and you now have 40,000 species that are listed in the CITES appendices and many more species that should be listed. Next, how do conservationists coordinate ahead of conferences to determine which species to propose protection for? Well, it's very important to understand that countries have the best understanding of what species require protection. So the first step is really trying to understand country priorities based on the status of the species that they are encountering in the field. Also, Born for USA is part of a network of conservationists called the Species Survival Network. It's 100+ organizations that collaborate on CITES. And so we collaborate with one another very closely to assess, exchange information about our understanding of species that are in need of protection. And at CITES meeting, we collaborate again to make sure that we are as effective as possible during meeting. And it's very important that we collaborate so that we're effective. Next, question, what species is Born for USA campaigning to protect at this CITES conference? Well, this has been a very, very busy conference and very successful so far, I have to say. A lot of the work that we have done has been advocating for the protection of marine species. Shark, rays that are critically endangered really needed the maximum level of protection under CITES, and they got it. They managed to get a listing in Appendix 1. We worked really to ensure that there was no weakening of the international trade ban in ivory, elephant ivory, making sure that the protection of African elephants remained intact. We succeeded there as well. Same thing for ensuring that nothing was done to weaken the trade ban in rhino horns. And then we wanted to make sure that the protection of giraffes wasn't weakened. We got a very good listing proposal for Dorcas gazelles adopted, but we have a lot more to do. Ahead of us is looking at the protection for critically endangered and endangered vulture species, making sure that the hornbill, African hornbill species, a bird species that's traded and in demand for its head, are adequately protected. So please follow us to make sure that we can give you updates on what's to come, but we have a lot more to do. Next, how are the protections implemented with CITES enforced in the real world in the animal's natural environment? The truth of the matter is that CITES is not implemented well because of lack of funds. A lot of the decision making about whether or not commercial trade should go ahead is made using very outdated population data. Old population surveys. We need to ensure more funds are made available for countries to have updated population data so that we have real-time information about the status of the species and good monitoring of species population. We also need to ensure that more funding is devoted to tackling wildlife crime so that it's no longer a threat. So a lot more needs to be done to ensure that CITES is effective on the implementation side. Next question, how does CITES fit into larger wildlife conservation efforts? CITES has a significant role to play in tackling overexploitation. We are facing a species extinction crisis. 1 million species are about to go extinct, many within decades. And a primary driver of this extinction crisis is overexploitation. And CITES is one of the tools that we have at our disposal to tackle it. Another thing that's important to note is that the animal and plant species that are being protected and discussed for protection at CITES have a very important role to play in maintaining the balance of the natural world, ensuring that ecosystem services can be maintained, like access to fresh water, clean air, the food supplies. So really, CITES is one of the components, an essential component to make sure that species don't go extinct. I've reached the end of my questions here, but I really invite you to keep yourself informed, follow the news and updates that we'll be posting on our website, and ensure that you can access our CITES hub at bornforusa.org/CITESCOP20. Thank you for your interest in our work, and I look forward to giving you more updates.